Some houses are built to keep strangers out. The most dangerous ones are built to keep secrets in. The rain tapped softly against the taxi window as I stared at the Manhattan skyline, glowing beyond the mist. Every tower looked polished from a distance, like success had been carved into stone and glass. Up close, I knew better. Every beautiful thing had a story. Sometimes it hid a scar. My name is Emily Carter, and until that night, I thought my life was painfully ordinary. 27 years old. Art teacher. Small apartment in Brooklyn. Student loans that seemed immortal. A rescue cat named Oliver who acted like he paid the rent. Nothing glamorous. Nothing mysterious. Certainly nothing connected to the people whose names appeared in newspapers beside billion-dollar deals and charity galas. Yet somehow, I found myself clutching an invitation embossed with gold lettering while a driver guided me toward the most exclusive event I had ever attended. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks earlier through the educational nonprofit where I volunteered on weekends. They needed an art instructor to represent community outreach programs during a fundraising gala. Most people declined because they were intimidated. I accepted because the organization desperately needed donors and because saying no had never changed my life. Maybe saying yes would. The Grand Meridian Hotel rose above Park Avenue like something from another century. Marble columns framed the entrance. Valets moved with practiced precision beneath warm golden lights. Men in tailored suits and women in elegant evening gowns disappeared through revolving doors as if entering another world. I stepped onto the sidewalk and immediately regretted every decision that had brought me there. My black dress was simple, respectable, bought on sale 2 years earlier. Compared to the designer gowns surrounding me, it felt invisible. I adjusted the silver necklace resting against my collarbone, a habit I had developed since childhood. The pendant was small and worn smooth with time. I had owned it for as long as I could remember. The truth was, I didn't even know where it originally came from. It had simply always been mine. The ballroom looked like a palace built inside a dream. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across polished marble floors. A string quartet played near a sweeping staircase while waiters carried silver trays through crowds of powerful people whose confidence seemed effortless. I smiled when appropriate, shook hands, spoke about after-school art programs, explained how creativity helped children process difficult experiences. Most guests nodded politely before returning to conversations worth more money than I would earn in 10 years. An hour passed, then another. I began relaxing enough to enjoy myself. Maybe I had misjudged the evening. Maybe this was simply a fundraiser filled with wealthy people trying to do some good. Then I noticed the change. It wasn't something I saw. It was something I felt. Conversations softened. People shifted their attention toward the entrance. The atmosphere itself seemed to tighten. Curious, I turned. A tall man had just entered the ballroom. Dark hair, sharp features, a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Nothing dramatic, nothing flashy. Yet the room responded to him as though gravity itself had changed direction. He moved calmly through the crowd while guests subtly stepped aside. Some greeted him. Others watched him. No one ignored him. I didn't know his name. I didn't know why my pulse suddenly quickened. I only knew that for a brief second, his gaze swept across the ballroom and landed directly on me. Everything seemed to stop. His expression remained controlled. Cold, even. Then his eyes dropped to the necklace around my neck. The crystal glass in his hand froze halfway to his lips. And for the first time that evening, the most powerful man in the room looked genuinely shocked. People say you can learn everything about a person by looking into their eyes. That night, all I learned was that the stranger across the ballroom knew something about me that I did not. The moment his gaze locked onto my necklace, the noise around us seemed to disappear beneath the distant hum of the string quartet. I stood frozen beside a display of floral arrangements while guests continued chatting and laughing as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet something had happened. I could feel it. The man lowered his glass slowly. His expression returned to perfect control so quickly I almost convinced myself I had imagined the shock. Almost. Then a silver-haired woman beside me touched my elbow. "Emily, there you are. Several donors would love to hear more about your program." I forced a smile and followed her deeper into the crowd. For the next 20 minutes, I answered questions about community outreach, student engagement, and art education. My mouth continued speaking, but my attention kept drifting toward the far side of the ballroom. Toward him. He stood surrounded by executives, politicians, and philanthropists. Yet he rarely spoke. He listened, observed, occasionally nodded. Everyone else seemed eager to impress him. Nobody treated him like an ordinary guest. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. While accepting a sparkling water from a passing waiter, I leaned toward another nonprofit director standing nearby. "Who is he?" I asked casually. The woman followed my gaze and immediately understood. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You do not know?" I shook my head. "That is Damian Moretti." The name meant nothing to me. Apparently my confusion showed because she laughed softly. "Trust me, most people in this room know exactly who he is." Before I could ask another question, someone approached her and pulled her into a separate conversation. I was left standing alone with a name and a growing sense of unease. Damian Moretti. Something about it felt familiar, although I could not explain why. I moved toward one of the ballroom windows overlooking the city. Rain streaked across the glass in silver lines. Below, Manhattan glittered beneath the storm. The view should have been calming. Instead, I felt watched. Not in a threatening way. In a deliberate way, like someone trying to solve a puzzle. My fingers found the necklace again. The small pendant felt cool against my skin. I barely noticed I was touching it until a deep voice spoke beside me. "You wear it often." I nearly jumped. Damian Moretti stood only a few feet away. Up close, he looked even more intimidating than he had from across the room. Not because of his size or appearance, because of his composure. The kind of calm confidence that made everyone else seem uncertain by comparison. "I am sorry," I said. "You startled me." A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth before disappearing. His eyes remained fixed on the pendant. "That necklace," he said carefully. "Where did you get it?" The question sounded simple. His tone did not. I glanced down at the silver charm. "I have had it since I was a child." Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. "Who gave it to you?" he asked. "I do not know." For the first time, Damian looked genuinely unsettled. His gaze lifted to meet mine. Several long seconds passed. Then someone called his name from across the ballroom. He ignored them. "Emily Carter," he said quietly. The sound of my name on his lips sent an unexpected chill down my spine. "Would you join me for lunch tomorrow?" My heart skipped. Not because it sounded romantic. It did not. It sounded important. As though the answer to a question neither of us fully understood was waiting somewhere just beyond that invitation. I have always believed that ordinary lives follow ordinary rules. You wake up. You go to work. You pay bills. You make plans for a future that looks more or less like the present. That belief lasted until 10:37 the next morning when a black luxury sedan stopped outside my apartment building in Brooklyn. I stood on the sidewalk holding a paper cup of coffee and staring at the vehicle as though it had appeared from another planet. The driver stepped out immediately. He was polite, professional, and somehow knew my name before I spoke a single word. "Miss Carter," he said, "Mr. Moretti is expecting you." Expecting. Not hoping. Not wondering. Expecting. 20 minutes later, Manhattan disappeared behind us. The city skyline slowly gave way to quiet roads lined with towering trees and private estates hidden behind wrought iron gates. The farther we traveled, the more surreal the entire situation felt. I should have declined the invitation. Any reasonable person would have. Yet curiosity had been pulling at me since the moment Damian Moretti froze at the sight of my necklace. The sedan turned onto a long private drive. My breath caught. At the end stood one of the largest homes I had ever seen. Pale stone walls rose 3 stories high. Massive windows reflected the cloudy afternoon sky. Marble staircases framed the entrance like something from a European palace. The place looked less like a home and more like a monument. A monument built by someone determined never to be forgotten. The front doors opened before I reached them. Inside, sunlight poured across polished marble floors. The air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh flowers. Everything felt immaculate, perfect, yet strangely empty, like a museum preserving memories instead of creating new ones. Damian waited near the grand staircase. He wore a charcoal sweater instead of a suit, but somehow looked just as intimidating. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I almost did not," I admitted. A shadow of amusement crossed his face. That would have disappointed me. He led me through a series of elegant rooms filled with artwork, antique furniture, and shelves lined with rare books. The house should have felt warm. Instead, a strange sadness lingered beneath its beauty. It was difficult to explain, like hearing music from another room and realizing someone had stopped dancing years ago. We eventually reached a sunlit sitting room overlooking the gardens. Lunch had already been prepared. Conversation began easily enough. We spoke about teaching, community programs, books, New York winters. Yet beneath every topic lingered the same unanswered question. Finally, Damien set down his coffee cup. His eyes moved once again to the pendant resting against my collarbone. "Emily," he said quietly, "are you absolutely certain you do not know where that necklace came from?" I shook my head. My adoptive parents said I had it when they brought me home. The silence that followed felt heavier than any conversation. Something changed in his expression. Not fear, not shock. Hope. Hope so sudden and unexpected that it almost looked painful. Before I could ask what it meant, a movement upstairs caught my attention. A door at the far end of the second-floor hallway slowly closed. Someone had been standing there, watching us. When I looked back at Damien, all the color had drained from his face. And for the second time since meeting him, he looked like a man confronting a ghost. There are moments when a room changes before anyone says a word. I felt at the instant Damien looked toward the second-floor hallway. The calm confidence that seemed permanently woven into him vanished for a fraction of a second. Then it was gone again, hidden behind the composed expression he wore so effortlessly. I turned back toward the staircase. The hallway was empty now, silent. Whatever I had seen was already gone. "Is everything okay?" I asked. Damien hesitated. It was brief, but noticeable. "Yes," he said. "Someone from the staff." The answer sounded reasonable. The problem was that it did not sound true. The conversation struggled to recover after that. I tried focusing on lunch, but my attention kept drifting. Not toward the mysterious hallway, toward Damien himself. The more time I spent with him, the less he matched the image people seemed to have of him. At the gala, everyone had treated him like the center of gravity. Powerful, untouchable. Yet here, sitting across from me with sunlight spilling across the marble floor, he looked almost distracted, like part of his mind was somewhere else entirely. "You keep looking at that necklace," I finally said. "Why?" His eyes lifted immediately. For a moment I thought he might answer. Instead he leaned back slightly. "Because I have seen one very similar before." "Where?" Another pause. Another carefully measured silence. "A long time ago." The response only deepened the mystery. Before I could press further, an elderly woman entered the room carrying a silver tray with fresh coffee. Her gray hair was neatly pinned back and her warm smile contrasted sharply with the formality of the house. "Mr. Moretti," she said. "The documents arrived." Damien nodded. "Thank you, Margaret." The woman turned toward me. Her expression softened. "You must be Emily." "I am." Something flickered across her face. Surprise. Then emotion. Gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "It is lovely to finally meet you." Finally meet me. The words settled heavily in my mind. Before I could ask what she meant, Margaret excused herself and left the room. Damien noticed my expression immediately. "Margaret has worked here for many years," he explained. "She tends to become attached to people before she knows them." I smiled politely, but the explanation raised more questions than it answered. An hour later, Damien offered to show me the gardens before I returned to the city. We stepped outside into cool autumn air. The estate stretched farther than I had realized. Stone pathways wound through carefully maintained gardens. A fountain sparkled beneath drifting clouds. Everything was beautiful. Everything was peaceful. Yet the strange feeling from inside the house followed me. As we rounded a corner near a hedge-lined path, I noticed something tucked beneath a covered terrace. An easel, several paintbrushes, and a canvas partially hidden beneath a white cloth. My pulse quickened. Art supplies. Someone here painted. Before I could move closer, Damien stepped directly into my path. Not aggressively. Simply enough to block my view. "Those belong to someone else," he said quietly. The air seemed to tighten between us. Then, for the third time since we met, I saw something rare in his eyes. Fear. Not for himself. For a secret he was desperately trying to protect. Some secrets do not hide because they are dangerous. They hide because the truth hurts too much to remember. Damien's words lingered in my mind long after we left the terrace. Those belong to someone else. Such a simple sentence. Yet the tension behind it felt impossible to ignore. On the drive back to Brooklyn, I replayed every strange moment from the past 24 hours. The shock when he saw my necklace. The closed door upstairs. Margaret's emotional reaction. The hidden art supplies. None of it fit together. By the time I reached my apartment, my head felt crowded with questions. Oliver greeted me at the door with an offended meow that suggested I had committed a personal betrayal by being gone all day. I laughed softly and scooped him into my arms. For a few minutes, feeding my cat and changing into comfortable clothes helped me feel normal again. Then my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before opening it. It contained only one sentence. I hope you arrived home safely. Damien. No explanation. No signature needed. Somehow that made it worse. I typed 3 different responses before settling on a simple thank you. His reply arrived almost immediately. Good. The conversation ended there. Yet I found myself staring at the screen long afterward. The next morning, life attempted to return to normal. My classroom buzzed with energy as students worked on watercolor projects. Paint-stained fingers. Laughter bounced off the walls. One little girl proudly showed me a picture of a blue horse with rainbow wings. Another insisted her abstract painting represented emotional growth. I loved moments like those. They reminded me why I became a teacher. Around noon, the school receptionist appeared at my classroom door. Emily, she called. You have a delivery. Confused, I followed her to the office. A large white box sat on the counter. No company logo. No explanation. Just my name. Inside were dozens of art supplies. Premium brushes. Professional paints. High-quality sketchbooks. The kind of materials our program could never afford. Tucked between them was a small card. For the students. Nothing else. No signature. No note. Yet somehow I knew exactly who had sent it. By the end of the school day, curiosity had overwhelmed caution. I called the number Damien had used the night before. He answered before the second ring. Emily. Hearing my name in his voice sent a strange shiver through me. You sent the supplies. It was not a question. Your students deserve them. You should not spend that much money on strangers. Silence. Then a quiet response. You are not a stranger. My heartbeat stumbled. The words carried a weight I did not understand. Before I could respond, another voice sounded faintly in the background on his end of the call. A woman's voice. Soft. Distant. Familiar. Damien immediately went silent. The line grew tense. I have to go, he said. Wait, I replied. Who is with you? The pause lasted only a second. Yet it felt much longer. Someone who has been waiting a very long time to meet you. Then the call disconnected, leaving me alone in my classroom with 1,000 new questions and the growing certainty that my life was somehow connected to a story nobody wanted to explain. Some memories feel like locked doors. You know they exist. You know something waits behind them. But no matter how hard you try, the key never appears. For 3 days after that phone call, I could not stop thinking about the woman whose voice I had heard in the background. Someone who had been waiting a very long time to meet me. The words followed me everywhere. Through crowded subway rides. Through lesson plans. Through late-night conversations with Oliver, who remained unimpressed by any mystery that did not involve cat food. I told myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Yet every explanation I imagined created 2 new questions. By Friday afternoon, my concentration had completely disappeared. I was cleaning paint palettes after class when another message arrived from Damien. Would you join me for dinner tomorrow evening? I stared at the screen. A month earlier, I would have declined without hesitation. My life did not normally include mysterious billionaires, hidden family stories, or unanswered questions attached to old necklaces. But my life no longer felt normal. I typed a single word. Yes. The reply came almost immediately. A driver will arrive at 6. Saturday arrived gray and cool. Rain clouds drifted above the city like slow-moving shadows. At exactly 6 o'clock, the same black sedan waited outside my building. The drive felt shorter this time. Familiar. Dangerous in a different way. Familiar things had a habit of lowering your guard. When we arrived, the estate seemed quieter than before. The enormous marble halls echoed softly as I stepped inside. Margaret greeted me near the entrance. Her smile was warm, but her eyes looked suspiciously emotional. It is good to see you again, dear, she said. Before I could respond, she reached out and gently touched the pendant around my neck. Her hand trembled slightly. Some things truly do find their way home. My breath caught. What does that mean? I asked, but Margaret immediately looked away. You should join Mr. Moretti. He is waiting in the library. Waiting. Everyone in this house seemed to be waiting. Damien stood beside a fireplace when I entered. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling behind him. Thousands of books filled the room. Yet what caught my attention was the photograph resting on a nearby table. It had been turned face down, deliberately, as though someone did not want visitors seeing it. Damien noticed where I was looking. A shadow crossed his expression. "Emily," he said quietly, "there is something I need to show you." My heartbeat quickened. Without another word, he led me from the library and toward the grand staircase. We climbed to the second floor, then continued down the hallway where I had seen the mysterious door closed days earlier. The farther we walked, the more silent the house became. Finally, Damien stopped in front of a pair of white double doors. His hand rested against the handle. For several seconds, he simply stood there, breathing, gathering courage. When he finally looked at me, I saw something I had never seen before in his eyes. Vulnerability. "Nobody has entered this room in 17 years, he said softly. Then he opened the door, and the first thing I saw hanging on the far wall was a portrait of a young woman who looked almost exactly like me. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The woman in the portrait could have been my sister. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The same light-colored eyes, the same shape of her face. Even the way her hair fell across her shoulders felt strangely familiar. I stood frozen in the doorway while sunlight drifted through tall windows, illuminating a room that looked untouched by time. Dust rested gently on polished furniture. Fresh flowers sat beneath the portrait despite everything else appearing preserved from another era. Someone still cared for this room. Someone still visited. "Who is she?" I whispered. Damien remained silent. His gaze never left the painting. The room seemed to grow quieter around us. Finally, he stepped forward. Her name was Sophia. The name settled heavily inside my chest. Somehow it felt important before I even understood why. I moved farther into the room. Every detail appeared carefully protected. A bookshelf filled one wall. Sketches and paintings lined another. A grand piano rested near the windows overlooking the gardens. Nothing felt accidental. Everything felt loved. My eyes drifted back to the portrait. "She looks like me." Damien nodded once. "Yes." His voice sounded distant, almost painful. That is why I reacted the way I did at the gala. I looked between him and the painting. Questions crowded my mind so quickly I could barely organize them. "Was she your wife?" I asked softly. His expression changed. Not quite sadness. Not quite regret. Something deeper. "No." Another silence followed. "She was my sister." The answer struck me harder than I expected. I glanced back toward the portrait. Suddenly, the similarities felt even more unsettling. And she wore the same necklace? Damien slowly reached into his pocket. For several seconds, he simply stared at something in his hand before extending it toward me. My pulse quickened. Resting in his palm was a photograph. Old, slightly faded, the edges worn with age. In the picture, Sophia stood smiling beneath a bright summer sky. Around her neck hung a silver pendant identical to mine. My fingers trembled as I took the photograph. "That is impossible," I whispered. "I have had mine for as long as I can remember." Damien looked at me carefully, not like a man studying evidence, like a man afraid of what the evidence might mean. "That is exactly why you are here." I lowered myself into a nearby chair. The room suddenly felt too small for the questions pressing against my thoughts. "What happened to her?" Damien walked toward the window. Autumn light outlined his silhouette. For several moments he said nothing. Then he spoke quietly. 17 years ago, Sophia disappeared." The words seemed to echo through the room. Disappeared. Not passed away. Not moved away. Disappeared. No one ever found answers. My heartbeat accelerated. A strange pressure formed behind my ribs. Something about the story felt uncomfortably close. Familiar in ways I could not explain. Then my eyes landed on a small wooden box resting beside the piano. Its lid stood slightly open. Inside sat dozens of photographs. Family photographs. Birthdays. Holidays. Summer afternoons. I rose slowly and stepped closer. One picture near the top caught my attention immediately. A smiling Sophia held a little girl in her arms. The child could not have been older than 3. Blonde hair, bright eyes, and around her tiny neck hung the same silver pendant. My pendant. The room tilted beneath my feet. Because the child in that photograph looked exactly like me. The photograph slipped slightly in my hands as the world around me seemed to lose its balance. I stared at the little girl again and again, searching for some difference that would prove I was mistaken. There was none. The same eyes. The same smile. Even the small curve of her chin matched the face I saw every morning in the mirror. My throat tightened. Who is she? I whispered, although part of me already feared the answer. Damien remained motionless beside the window. The silence stretched between us until it became almost unbearable. Finally, he crossed the room and stopped beside me. His voice was low when he spoke. Her name was Lily. I looked down at the photograph once more. And you think that child is me? It was not a question. Damien exhaled slowly. I think there are too many coincidences for that possibility to be ignored. My heart hammered so loudly I could hear it. The room that had once felt elegant and peaceful now felt like the center of a storm. Every object seemed connected to a story I did not know. Every answer revealed another mystery. My adoptive parents told me they found me through a private placement agency, I said. They never mentioned another family. Damien nodded. And I am not asking you to believe anything yet. I am only asking you to look at the facts. He reached toward the wooden box and removed another photograph. This one showed Sophia sitting on the terrace outside the estate. The little girl sat beside her holding a sketchbook. Again, the pendant rested against the child's neck. Again, the resemblance was impossible to dismiss. My chest tightened. Suddenly, fragments of strange memories drifted through my mind. Not complete memories. Feelings. A bright garden. The scent of roses after rain. Fingers brushing through my hair while someone hummed softly. They disappeared as quickly as they arrived, leaving me shaken. I do not remember any of this, I admitted. You were very young, Damien replied. If you are Lily, 17 years is a long time. If. The word mattered. I appreciated that he continued using it. Neither of us truly knew the truth yet. We only knew that the pieces were beginning to align. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Margaret appeared in the doorway carrying a tray of tea. The moment her eyes landed on the photograph in my hands, tears filled them. She pressed a hand against her mouth. Margaret, Damien said gently. The woman shook her head as though trying to steady herself. Then she looked directly at me. Not at the photograph. At me. You have her smile, she whispered. The room fell silent again. I could not breathe. Could not think. Because Margaret was not looking at me like a stranger. She was looking at me like someone who had finally come home. Then Damien reached into the wooden box one final time and removed a sealed envelope yellowed with age. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were 4 words that made my pulse stop. To Lily, when you return. My fingers trembled as I stared at the envelope. The paper looked fragile with age, its edges softened by time. Someone had written those words nearly 2 decades earlier. Someone had believed that one day Lily would return. The realization sent a strange ache through my chest. Damien carefully placed the envelope on the table between us. He did not touch it again. I never opened it, he said quietly. I looked up in surprise. 17 years? He nodded. It was not mine to open. The room fell silent except for the faint ticking of an antique clock somewhere beyond the doorway. My eyes returned to the elegant handwriting. To Lily, when you return. Not if. When. Whoever had written those words had never stopped believing. I swallowed hard and reached for the envelope. The paper crackled softly beneath my fingertips. Every instinct told me that whatever waited inside could change everything. Slowly, I opened the seal. A folded letter rested inside. Nothing else. No photographs. No documents. Just a single handwritten letter. My pulse hammered in my ears as I unfolded the pages. The handwriting matched the words on the envelope. Delicate. Careful. Familiar in a way I could not explain. I began reading. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this, then life has been kinder than I feared and stronger than I hoped. It means you found your way back to the people who never stopped loving you. Tears blurred my vision immediately. I blinked rapidly and continued. There may come a day when you do not remember me. If that happens, please know that none of it was your fault. Children should never carry the weight of adult mistakes. No matter what you are told, no matter what you believe, you were always loved. Always. My throat tightened painfully. The words felt less like reading and more like hearing a voice reach across 17 years. I continued. You loved drawing pictures of birds. You hated thunderstorms unless someone sat beside you. You insisted every bedtime story have a happy ending. And every morning you wore your necklace because you said it made you brave. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Across the room, Margaret quietly wiped her eyes. Even Damien looked away for a moment. The final paragraph was shorter than the rest. If someday you return and wonder who you are, start with this truth. You are not defined by what was taken from you. You are defined by the love that never stopped waiting for you. Love, Mom. The last word shattered whatever emotional distance I had been trying to maintain. Mom. My hands shook uncontrollably. The room seemed to blur around the edges. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then I noticed something attached to the back of the final page. A small folded note secured with aging tape. Different handwriting. Different ink. My heartbeat accelerated again. Slowly, I unfolded it. Only one sentence appeared on the yellowed paper. If Lily ever returns, tell her not to trust Jonathan Pierce. The moment Damien read the name over my shoulder, all the color drained from his face. Names have power. Some open doors. Others expose secrets that were never meant to survive. The moment Damien saw the name Jonathan Pierce, something changed in the room. His jaw tightened. His gaze locked onto the note as though it had suddenly become the most important object in the world. You know him, I said quietly. It was not a question. Damien looked away first. That alone told me everything. For a man who seemed capable of controlling every situation, his reaction felt unusually personal. Margaret lowered herself into a nearby chair. Her hands trembled slightly. I hoped I would never hear that name again, she whispered. A chill traveled down my spine. Who is he? Neither of them answered immediately. The silence stretched until it became almost unbearable. Finally, Damien exhaled slowly and walked toward the window. Rain had begun tapping softly against the glass outside. Gray clouds drifted above the gardens. Everything beyond the room looked peaceful. Inside, nothing felt peaceful anymore. Jonathan Pierce was my father's attorney, Damien said. For years, he handled family matters, business records, trusts, and legal affairs. I frowned. Then why would my mother write that? Damien turned back toward me. Because after Sophia disappeared, Jonathan was one of the last people known to have information about what happened. My heartbeat quickened. Did the police investigate him? They questioned everyone connected to the family. His voice remained calm, but tension lingered beneath every word. Nothing was proven. No evidence. No answers. I looked down at the note again. The handwriting appeared rushed compared to the letter, as though whoever wrote it had been afraid of running out of time. Suddenly another question surfaced. Who wrote this message? Margaret stood and moved closer. Her eyes filled with sadness as she studied the paper. That is not Sophia's handwriting. The room seemed to tilt. I looked from Margaret to Damien. Then whose is it? Neither answered. Then Margaret slowly reached toward the note. I believe it belongs to your grandfather. My breath caught. Another piece of the puzzle. Another mystery hiding inside a mystery. Damien crossed the room and carefully opened a drawer in an antique desk. He removed a leather folder thick with documents. Years of records. Investigations. Notes. Newspaper clippings. I stared in disbelief. You kept all of this? He met my eyes. I never stopped looking. Something in his voice made my chest ache unexpectedly. 17 years. While the rest of the world had moved on, he had continued searching, continued hoping, continued waiting. Damien opened the folder and withdrew an old photograph. A man stood beside a luxury car outside a downtown office building. Silver hair, expensive suit, confident smile. Jonathan Pierce, Damien said. I studied the image carefully. Then my pulse stopped. Because I recognized him. Not from a photograph. Not from a news article. From real life. My hands began to shake. That is impossible, I whispered. Damien's expression darkened. Emily. I looked back at the photograph. Every memory suddenly felt crystal clear. The man had attended my college graduation 6 years ago. He had shaken my hand, smiled at me, and according to my adoptive parents, he was the person who arranged my adoption. The past does not always return as a memory. Sometimes it returns as a name you thought meant nothing. I could still see Jonathan Pierce standing beside me at my college graduation. The memory felt painfully clear now. He had congratulated me, asked about my plans, smiled when I mentioned teaching. At the time, I assumed he was simply someone connected to the adoption agency, someone being kind. Now every detail felt different. Every detail felt deliberate. Damien stared at me across the room. You are certain? He asked. I nodded slowly. My adoptive parents introduced him to me. They said he helped arrange everything when I was young. The silence that followed felt enormous. Rain continued tapping against the windows, while 17 years of unanswered questions seemed to gather around us. Damien closed the folder and rubbed a hand across his jaw. For the first time since I had met him, he looked less like a man in control and more like someone struggling to process hope and fear at the same time. Margaret lowered herself into a chair beside the fireplace. Then he knew, she whispered. He knew where she was all along. Nobody answered, because nobody wanted to say the possibility out loud. I moved toward the portrait of Sophia again. Her painted eyes seemed softer now, familiar, almost comforting. If Jonathan knew where I was, I said quietly, why would he keep it secret? Damien looked toward the photograph still resting on the desk. That is the question that changes everything. My chest tightened. I wanted answers. I wanted certainty. Instead, every answer seemed to uncover another layer of mystery. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Small, ordinary, yet impossible to ignore. There is something else, I said. Damien immediately focused on me. What is it? I hesitated. A few years ago, Jonathan sent me a birthday gift. Damien frowned. What kind of gift? I closed my eyes, trying to remember. A music box. Margaret inhaled sharply. The reaction startled me. What? I asked. Her eyes had widened. Do you still have it? I nodded. Of course. It is in my apartment. Margaret and Damien exchanged a look. One of those silent conversations shared by people carrying the same history. My pulse quickened. Why does that matter? Damien walked slowly toward the fireplace. Because Sophia owned a music box. The room seemed to shrink around me. Lots of people own music boxes. Not this one. His voice remained calm. It was custom-made. There was only one. I stared at him. The implications settled heavily between us. If the gift Jonathan sent me was the same music box, then this was no coincidence. It was proof. Proof that somehow my life had remained connected to theirs all along. Then another realization struck me. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. My hands trembled as I opened an old photograph stored in my gallery. The image showed the music box sitting on a shelf in my apartment. Simple, elegant, silver details along the edges. I handed the phone to Damien. The moment he saw the picture, he froze. Then he slowly looked up at me. Emily, he said softly. There is an inscription hidden inside that box. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. How do you know that? His expression shifted. Hope, certainty, fear, all at once. Because I was the one who wrote it. Some truths arrive quietly. Not with chaos. Not with certainty. Just a single realization that changes everything forever. Less than 2 hours later, we stood inside my apartment in Brooklyn. Oliver circled Damien's expensive shoes with deep suspicion while I crossed the living room toward the bookshelf. The music box sat exactly where it always had. Small, elegant, ordinary. For years it had been nothing more than a thoughtful gift from a man I barely knew. Now it felt like a key. My hands trembled as I lifted it from the shelf. Damien watched silently. Margaret stood beside him, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles had turned white. I carefully opened the lid. The familiar melody drifted into the room. Soft, gentle, somehow sadder than I remembered. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Damien reached forward. Beneath the velvet lining, hidden along the inner edge of the box, was a tiny compartment I had never noticed before. He pressed a concealed latch. A soft click echoed through the apartment. My breath caught. The false panel opened. Inside rested a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, protected all these years. Oh my God, I whispered. Damien closed his eyes briefly, as though seeing a ghost finally become real. I removed the paper carefully and unfolded it. The handwriting was different from my mother's letter. Familiar, masculine, strong. At the top of the page was a date from 17 years ago. Below it were only a few sentences. If you are reading this, then I failed to protect the truth. Lily belongs with her family. She always has. One day she deserves to know that she was never abandoned. She was loved beyond measure. Do not let her grow up believing otherwise. Jonathan Pierce. The room fell silent. Completely silent. My eyes moved across the words again and again. The same conclusion appeared every time. Jonathan had known. Not suspected. Not guessed. Known. He was trying to tell the truth, Margaret whispered through tears. He left evidence. Damien nodded slowly. Which means he was not the enemy my family believed he was. Another piece of the puzzle shifted into place. Another assumption collapsed. For years, everyone had looked in the wrong direction. Suddenly, a memory surfaced. Not a feeling this time. A real memory. Brief. Fragmented. Yet unmistakable. A woman kneeling beside me in a garden. Sunlight warming her hair. Her laughter floating through the summer air. A silver pendant pressed into my tiny hands. I gasped. The image vanished instantly. But it had been real. More real than anything before. Damien stepped closer. Concern filled his eyes. What happened? I touched the necklace resting against my collarbone. I remembered her. The words barely emerged above a whisper. Emotion flashed across his face so quickly it almost hurt to witness. 17 years of grief. 17 years of hope. 17 years of waiting. All colliding in a single moment. Then my phone vibrated unexpectedly on the coffee table. The sound shattered the silence. I glanced at the screen and froze. An unknown number. One new message. Only 7 words appeared on the display. I know you found the music box. The message remained on the screen like a voice reaching through the darkness. I know you found the music box. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even Oliver seemed to sense something unusual as he sat silently near the window. My pulse hammered against my ribs while I stared at the unfamiliar number. Who sent it? Margaret whispered. I swallowed hard. I do not know. Damien stepped beside me and studied the screen. His expression remained calm, but I had learned enough to recognize the tension hidden beneath it. Then another message appeared. You deserve the truth. The 3 of us exchanged glances. For 17 years, everyone had been chasing answers. Now answers seemed to be chasing us. Before I could type a response, the phone began ringing. The same unknown number. My hand trembled as I accepted the call. Hello. For several seconds, there was only silence. Then an elderly voice spoke softly. Emily. The sound of my name sent a chill through me. Not because the voice felt threatening. Because it sounded emotional. Relieved. Who is this? I asked. A long pause followed. Someone who made a promise a very long time ago. Tears suddenly filled my eyes without warning. I did not understand why. Perhaps because every piece of this story seemed connected to promises. Promises people had spent years trying to keep. Do you know what happened? I whispered. Yes. The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Then tell me. Silence returned briefly. Then the voice spoke again. Your mother knew she might lose everything except hope. So she left clues. She believed one day you would follow them home. Home. The word struck deeper than I expected. The caller continued. Jonathan Pierce spent years protecting information he was never supposed to have. After he passed away, he left instructions. If you were ever found, the final truth had to be delivered. My breath caught. Passed away. 3 years ago. I closed my eyes. Somehow that made the letter and the hidden message even more meaningful. A man I barely remembered had carried a secret for most of my life. The voice continued. Emily, there was never a conspiracy. There was never a hidden fortune. There was only a family searching for a little girl and a few people trying to honor promises they made to your mother. Tears rolled down my cheeks. Across the room, Margaret quietly cried as well. Damien stood completely still, listening, hoping. The voice softened. You were loved every day you were gone. The line fell silent. Then the caller added one final sentence. Look behind Sophia's portrait. The call ended. Immediately, Damien and I looked at each other. Less than an hour later, we stood once again inside the preserved room. The portrait watched over us as afternoon sunlight filled the space with gold. Carefully, Damien lifted the painting from the wall. Hidden behind it was a small wooden compartment. Inside rested a single photograph. Sophia smiling. A little girl in her arms. And beside them stood a younger Damien, laughing at something beyond the camera. Written across the bottom in faded ink were 5 simple words. Our family, exactly as intended. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Because for the first time in 17 years, the mystery no longer mattered. The waiting was over. The searching was over. The house that had spent years preserving memories could finally begin creating new ones. Months later, spring sunlight filled the gardens where forgotten flowers bloomed again. Laughter drifted through open windows. New paintings appeared on old easels. Music returned to silent rooms. And sometimes, when I looked across the terrace and saw Damien smiling instead of merely surviving, I understood something my mother had known all along. The things we lose can break our hearts, but the things that find their way back can teach those hearts how to heal.